probably one of the fastest growing submarkets in the Houston MSA, which, kind of by extension makes it one of the faster growing cities in the United States.
It's so big. It's so unbelievably diverse that if you can't find a kind of part of Houston that resonates with you, it's not really Houston's fault. There's probably something wrong with you.
These environmental problems, even if they're not a huge problem on the face of it, there's a cost associated with it.
Kind of there's winners and losers in every kind of situation, and they would be like in hog heaven.
Welcome to this week's episode of Real Estate Anonymous. We've got a special guest, Andrew Schaper, with us, and we're going to be talking about a self-storage, outdoor storage facility in Conroe, Texas. Andrew's going to bring up some very interesting considerations for investing in these types of properties. You're going to learn a lot about environmental concerns, what you need to look out for, and you're going to also learn about how to cut and shoot in Texas.
Welcome into another edition of Real Estate Anonymous podcast for dumb guys by dumb guys. We've got Elliot White, Eric Weatherholtz. Brett Moss is on screen but has yet to figure out how the technology in his office works, so he may or may not join us. And then we got a special guest, Andrew Schaper, is joining us. We're going to chop up a self-storage and outdoor storage, outdoor industrial storage. Is that what you like to call this?
Yeah, outdoor storage, outdoor parking, expansion, and
outdoor park. Yeah. So these guys have figured out how to brand parking lots as an asset class. I think they call it iOS. Is that right?
That's right. That's the rebrand.
That's the big rebrand. So we'll get into that. But before we kind of chop it up on this deal, I think we maybe go around the horn. Eric, what's new in your world, man?
Well, we skated by a couple of hurricanes here in the dirty South, and we got blue sky and out fresh looking for deals.
Not a bad way to be. We'll throw this to Brett just in case you can hear us. Brett, you able to hear us? You want to weigh in?
I am. It's 2024, and it's taken me 10 minutes to connect to this podcast, so I'm doing great this morning. Hurricanes obviously are not awesome. And I think for any one of the 18 people that watched last week's podcast, I have great news. Neither of my sons are here and the box cutters are secure for this episode.
Okay. Good. I will say you blaming your technology setup is a little bit like when I blame my 7-iron. I'm not entirely convinced that it's not just your fault and there's something going on your end.
Yeah, I blame the arrows, not the archer. Elliot.
Yeah, that makes plenty of sense. I was bringing you all up to speed before we started recording, but we are working on a pretty sizable Section 8 portfolio. We're kind of optimistic about how it's going so far. It's taken up a lot of time, but should be a good outcome for the residents and kind of a fun transaction to work on. So that's been taking up the bulk of our time. As it becomes more real, I'm happy to share more details on it. But for now, it's just a thing we're keeping an eye on. Before we get into this deal, Andrew, you want to kind of introduce yourself, tell people what you're up to, how they can get a hold of you, all that fun stuff?
Sure. So I'm Andrew Schaper. I'm an engineer by background and got into real estate probably, 6 or 7 years ago, originally as a sort of I say passive investor, but it was student rentals, so I wouldn't actually say it was that passive. Got in originally through residential and have slowly built my way up to taking on some development work. Posted a lot of it on Twitter a while back. I don't do that as much anymore, but it's still out there and we're still building. The first deal that we built started back in 2020, and it was started out as a boat and RV storage, and then we've sort of expanded it into traditional mini storage. And, again, I have other operating businesses like an engineering consulting company, and I've got oil and gas businesses that are, were kind of legacy and started long before I ever got into real estate development. But I enjoy real estate development. It's a lot more fun in some ways and also a lot more brain damage in other ways than anything else I've tried in the past. And we've really gotten into, I guess, kind of just the full light industrial spectrum of builds. We really focus right now I have one partner in the entire business with development, and he's silent on Twitter. He watches, and so he'll probably see this and laugh at me. But we focus mostly around the Houston metro. We're out in the exurbs around Houston, the growing kind of population centers, and focus mostly on ground up development. So we're looking at boat and RV storage, mini storage, light industrial, single tenant and multi-tenant buildings. We've got one property out west of Houston in kind of in the Katy area, and then we've got another one south of Houston, kind of down 288. So that'll be our second ground up project. And then today I actually picked up this OM from this deal in Conroe. Thought it was interesting. We don't usually buy stabilized properties, and we're mostly interested in the ground up development side of it. But I thought this one was interesting because it has some expansion potential and it has some other kind of unique features, and it kind of fits our asset class too, a mix of outdoor parking, covered parking, enclosed RV storage, boat storage, and mini storage.
So you guys are kind of expanding the self-storage and just saying, give us all of your whatever everything, the size that
everything you don't want in your home, and we just hope to God you don't move into the site and take up residence there.
It does seem like kind of higher risk of that happening with some of these RVs.
I like this play that Andrew just came up with. Maybe micro units living in a storage unit.
Yeah, no, people have taken us up on that, even though we didn't offer it. So
make sure you're in the air conditioning part if you're in Conroe in the middle of the summer. Well, one quick question, Andrew. Again, thanks for joining us. And I know you mentioned you had a silent investor in an effort to show I'm paying attention. I see your Texas A&M cut back there. Is the silent investor by any chance Jimbo Fisher, who's got a little bit of money walking around?
No, it's not. No, right. He has $85 million walking around money. So he would be a great investor. My partner is an operating partner, so he is not silent. He and I split the role 50-50, and we don't have outside investors. It's just the two of us. We do have very nice lenders, I guess, is the best way to put it. People that help us and support us have, we've pledged our firstborn to them, and they're ready to take it back if things don't work.
Yep, that sounds right. We got to figure out a way to get in front of Jimbo so he can give you some of that walking around money.
That's right.
I don't think he would be very silent, though, based on his deal at FSU or Texas A&M.
So before we get into the specific deal, can you just we had Baird Kleinsmith on a while ago. We were talking about self-storage. But you are, I assume, picking markets. There's some broader thesis before you're saying, I want to own this thing in Conroe because XYZ reason. What are some of the broader things that make you go, this is a good market for us to be in? I assume it's kind of tied to income. You don't want people to be so wealthy that they just own estates that can hold all their stuff, but you don't want them to be sort of on the lower income span where they have no need for storage. So there's some kind of sweet spot.
Yeah, I think the strike zone for us is sort of middle to upper middle class, near neighborhoods that are highly deed restricted and master planned. So we're seeing a lot of this all the way around Houston in every direction. That was really the thesis around our Western Houston property, where we were in front of big developments. And I say that, 2,400 acre, 7,000 home development, 5 years play out. When you have homes that are on 50-foot lots or 60-foot lots, you're not able to park anything in the driveway. You're not able to park anything on the street. You have HOAs. And so when folks come into homes like that and they're 2,000 square feet, they don't have a lot of garage space. They don't have a lot of extra storage space. Sometimes it's first-time home buyers, and so they really need extra storage space. They cannot park trailers or any kind of RVs in their driveway. No boats, nothing like that. So that's usually when we'll get the call, is when they're moving into neighborhoods like that. And we've found some success being the closest option to those sorts of builds, so the large master plan communities. And we want to be in the path of growth, or in the way of growth, I guess. The risk that we take with those sort of builds is that at the time when we purchase the land, it's more freely available. by the time that the community is built around us, it becomes less so, but still something that somebody could compete with us on. So we're always looking at what's going on around us, trying to figure out who's building, trying to determine, what constitutes the biggest threat to us, from a supply perspective. So I would be remiss if I said that the boat and RV storage space is it's a very working class kind of business owners are the primary mom and pop owners of these things. And you'll see folks just stand these things up out of the ground with their own equipment sometimes. So you have to be a little bit nimble with the product, type and your mix, and to make sure that if somebody kind of comes around you and builds something similar, that you have a way to pivot your product a little bit.
So if it's up to you and you're picking how much of your revenue is coming from, you said mini storage earlier. Is mini storage and self storage essentially the same thing?
Same thing. Yeah.
Same thing, right. So if you're picking your revenue split, you've got X amount, X percent coming from self storage and X percent coming from boat and RV, or just general can't fit in a storage unit. What's the right mix for you?
Yeah, so we started at our site with basically 100% outdoor storage, canopy storage, and open parking. And as time has gone on, we've expanded it and added the buildings. So it's a question that we are trying to answer real time, but because of the way that we sort of permitted and built our site and continue to build it in phases, we're introducing different product classes over time. So to answer your question, Elliot, I think what we see is not very many facilities have a mix like this. So the deal that we're going to look at today has both. It has outdoor parking that appears to have been added after the fact, and it has some additional area in the rear of the property that you could turn into either, right? You might be able to turn into traditional storage, or you might be able to turn into parking. But I would just say we like to have a limited inventory of each class. So, we built over 100 covered spaces at our site outright at the beginning. It took a long time to fill those. The open parking filled faster, so we feel like there's more velocity there, and we're okay having a larger inventory of those sites. But as we continue to build back into the first site and expand it, we keep consuming the open parking spaces. So right now we're trying to look at the incremental value of new buildings, whether they're fully enclosed RV buildings or they're, the mini storage, traditional storage buildings. We're even looking at kind of large, I don't know if you want to call them contractor units or whatever, but we've got a couple concepts around that we might introduce at that first site just to get some more diversity in the unit mix. Because you find that there's a fixed number of people who will call you each month for each class. So if you have too many of a specific one, you're just never going to get to the point where it's bumping up against 100% occupancy.
And how long does it take you to be responsive to increased demand? Somebody says, I'd love canopy parking here. Like this deal we're looking at doesn't have it. But if you own this, you're talking to a few guys and they're saying, you know what, I'd actually give you whatever it is, another $50 a month if this could be covered. Presumably you can stand that up in, a month or so and be pretty responsive.
Yeah, I think for something like this where you've already got ground cover, and presumably this is all permitted, just looking at the deal that we're looking at here. If it's already permitted, adding canopy coverage to something like the front area of this one might be interesting. It probably wouldn't really impact your detention much because you're already impermeable surface. So that's something to maybe think through. With canopies in that front area, it's going to get pretty tight trying to get RVs in and out of there. And you can see that some of those they might be pull behind campers, and you're already kind of bumping up against the space constraints that I would use to have a parking area for something like that. But in the back of the property, there is more space. I noticed on this one actually that the owner, if somebody bought it like in 2022, they came in, renovated it, and added this parking. Now their value add is done and they're ready to sell it. But looking at older Google Earth photos, you can tell that they actually did some dirt work in the back of the property as if they were going to build new buildings.
Yeah.
And they never did that. And I have my thoughts on why that might be. Really has to do with the fact that part of it's in the floodplain.
This has been helpful. I'd like to maybe now write the overview. We could get into this kind of specific deal and how you look at it.
Sure.
Floodplain, obviously you're not going to put storage units back there. I guess the first question, and one that Brad and Eric and I are probably aligned and wanting to know, if I was an enterprising young man looking to cook meth, which unit would be the best for that?
Yeah, I think I'd pick one of those back units all the way in the very back.
You think the back corner? That's really so. When someone comes in and says, "I'd like a back corner unit,"
Yeah, you pretty much know right away if they say, I want to know where your cameras are. That's a pretty
right.
Where do you have the least amount of light in this facility?
Right. Yeah, what's the darkest, least washed portion? Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this is all good to know.
Yeah, I would say that's considerate for the other users of this space to be further away in case something does go awry.
It's just being a good neighbor.
Whatever goes awry with that.
I think that's exactly right.
In the backyard and just have tell them to set their tents up back there.
Yeah, I would say the vacant land to the right in this photo. I don't know what direction that's probably a better return on investment if you're.
Yeah, you could really lean into that for the back parcel and just have like 2 units and a bunch of tree cover and no cameras and really just pitch like, this is the most remote location. We're never here. You need a separate key to get back here, and units are $5,000 a month. And they'd be like,
if you want to do anything illegal can happen back there out of sight.
Right. We put vent stacks in here just because we didn't really know what people would be cooking or storing. But anyway, these 2 units are yours.
Yep.
This has gone off the rails earlier than usual, Andrew. So welcome to the circus, my friend.
Hey, I'm here.
One of the things Baird talked about was you put your stuff in a storage unit. There's a hassle factor of getting it out, and so you can sort of boil a frog with rent increases over time that people will just eat because there's the hassle of going to get the stuff, getting grandma's stuff and putting it somewhere else. It seems like with boats and RVs that there's less of a hassle factor. You just go haul it to the next place.
Yeah,
that's right.
How real is that?
Yeah, I think so. We actually have some very recent experience with this because we just raised rates across all of our canopy parking and a lot of our open parking. And one thing we saw is that for those sites where we were getting really good velocity of leasing, there's a bit of a strategy difference between you can just change your street rates upward, or you can change everyone's rent up and keep your street rates lower. And so if you do that, you run the risk of having existing customers call you and they're pissed off about what you've just done, right? You've raised the rents, but now you're offering lower rents to someone else. We've gone with the approach of raising the rents on everybody uniformly, across everything, all the parking covered and everything, and raising the street rates at the same time. And it's had the impact of slowing down our move-ins. And of course, eventually it drives a bit more churn. But yeah, you're right, Eric. That's it's a big consideration for us because the switching costs are much lower with boat and RV, right? Especially if you're outdoors.
All right. How about this? You got, to me, there's a difference between the two. If I've got a boat, I want it seems like proximate to where I'm going to put it in the water.
That's right.
Yeah.
With the RV, I'm probably less, I'm going different places a lot, so that's maybe less of a concern. Are they?
That's exactly right.
Is there a difference between the two?
No, that's exactly right. So in our Western Houston location, we're not anywhere near a body of water. We probably only have 3 or 4 boats in the whole site, so it's all RVs and trailers for the most part. So boat and RV storage might be a misnomer. It's actually mostly RVs and commercial trailers. So you're exactly right, though, that the dominant storage, if you have this type of parking, you'll see vehicles, you'll see like tag trailers, you'll see motorhomes. They're stored closer to someone's home and primary residence. If you go out to a lake, you'll start to see more boat storage. Or if you go down to the bay, you'll see more boat storage because people like to have the boat closer to where they're going to be using it. So our sites are actually better set up for RV owners as well as trailer operators. So we actually get a pretty fair bit of our business from people who operate hotshot trailers, have flatbeds. These are guys who their job is driving around equipment. And so they've got these big flatbeds that they'll come park out there, and they're using them every day, right? They come to the facility, they pick it up, but they can't park it at their house. So that's a big piece. It's probably maybe 15% of the guys that use our site is, they're doing that because it's the lowest cost place to store their equipment and close to their house.
On a deal like this, kind of give us the overview, and this comes into your inbox. How do you kind of stack rank whether it's worth looking at? What would make it interesting to you? What concerns do you have? Like, get into the deal and walk us through this one.
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of picked up on this one because it's in an area that is similar to some of the other areas that we would look at. It's fast growing population. Conroe at one point, it's just over 100,000 population. It was probably one of the fastest growing submarkets in the Houston MSA, which, kind of by extension makes it one of the faster growing cities in the United States.
And we're north, right?
What's that? Yeah, this is north of Houston. I can kind of pull it up here, see if I can share this with you guys. So let me,
I think to Andrew's point, it was one of the largest on a percentage basis growing MSAs in the country. It might have been definitely top 10, maybe top 5.
Houston's a great city. I mean, Houston is one of those where you'll hear people say, "Oh, I don't like Houston." It's so big. It's
giant.
So unbelievably diverse that if you can't find a kind of part of Houston that resonates with you, it's not really Houston's fault. There's probably something wrong with you. I'm not saying you need to live there, but it's such an interesting and diverse city. It's a pretty cool place to spend some time, except in the summer.
There's some cool, funky stuff going down in Houston.
Yeah, except it's hot as Do not go there. Yeah, don't go there from like middle of June to the end of September. Just don't do it.
To call this Houston would be a bit of a stretch, but I'm in this area, like right in the downtown part of Houston. Our first property is out here in Katy, west of town. Mm-hmm. Our second property is down here south of Houston in Fort Bend, Brazoria County. So it's pretty far outside the city. And then the property we're going to look at today is up in Conroe. So this is north of the Woodlands, north of Spring. It truly is an exurb. It's not really in the Houston city limits, not even close to Houston, really. It's quite a drive. And this property that we're kind of focused on is just outside this main loop of Conroe. If you zoom back out, you can see there's been a bunch of residential development and expansion of Conroe proper. And now there's a bunch of the same going on out here in what's a town called Cut and Shoot. So if you're interested in.
What a great town name.
Great name. That is totally a Texas name.
That's a great name.
City.
Yeah. And so a lot of this is being developed. All this area around here is becoming residential developments. And so the area has a lot of growth. But, land's been fairly available and, there are some competing storage facilities around here. I'm kind of zooming into this slowly, but.
Yep.
So you're saying there is land available in Cut and Shoot, Texas?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm also surprised to hear that. I thought the bustling metropolis of Cut and Shoot would be just jammed, but.
That's right. Yep. It's, this is an interesting area. I think, you always have kind of supply constraints. I actually have a little presentation I put together that shows you guys kind of exactly what's going on around here. Some of the competitors just pulled up buildings with storage units on them and put them on blocks. So I was like, well, that's kind of tricky. But, just looking at this standalone, if I were just zooming in, the first thing I would see is, let me zoom back out. They've partially built out this facility. This little front area is what we saw was a parking area. It's about 20 spaces. And then they've got this back area. They claim it's 2 acres, but it's actually 1.6.
Wait, are you saying the brokers are not being accurate?
Right. Yeah.
I would say, sorry to interrupt here, Andrew, but I would say this is an infill Houston location from a broker perspective. And that is not 1.6. That's closer to 5 acres as a broker. Yeah. So just
generational asset available below replacement cost.
That's right.
Core location. Yeah. Core location.
So I would zoom in, on Google Earth, I'd take a quick look at it. And then I would jump over. Usually I'm using Land ID, which is the kind of one way to screen things. Let me kind of zoom in here. So same property. You can kind of see they got the storage built here. We got this little area up here. It's in the 500-year floodplain. Not a big deal. They just kind of covered it with asphalt and built some parking. Then you got this, what they're calling 2 acres, but it's like, again, 1.6. That's partially 500 and partially 100-year floodplain. And you could see on the Google Earth that they actually had brought a bunch of dirt out here and started putting fill in the floodplain. And I don't know why they would stop doing that, except that it's not permitted. And yeah. So
Except they got caught.
yeah, except they might have gotten caught, and maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's not a great idea. So they had already brought a bunch of dirt back here and started leveling this area, like they were going to build some more storage, and then stopped suspiciously. So that's one thing I saw here immediately. Obviously, partial floodplain. Usually there will be restrictions on what you can place in the floodplain. Is if you add fill, that usually requires a permit. It might require FEMA map amendments. In some cases, they just simply will not let you build within 100 feet of it. So in this area, even though the broker says, hey, you're going to add 400 some odd units, I would immediately start assuming that this is going to be parking. I would not that this is going to be more buildings. And if I did, I would certainly limit it to the area outside the floodplain. If you're in the floodplain, you'll have to have flood insurance. You can usually build in the 500 year, but you can't build in the 100 year usually because it's below base flood elevation. So that's one thing I picked up right off the bat. The other thing I would say on this one, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to show this one, and this is more for people that are just screening deals that maybe you wouldn't see it initially, but you would see it when you got out there. So right next to you, you've got an auto salvage yard.
Whoa.
Yeah.
No way you got a clean phase one there, right?
That's right. You don't have a clean phase one. You very likely don't have a clean phase two either. I dealt with one of these in 2023, and it was gnarly. You had PERC, you had VOCs, you had all kinds of stuff. And this is right offset to you. It looks like it's been active for a really long time. It's just kind of what I would expect. This is all floodplain dirt over here. So you've got a probable environmental issue over here that, you might be able to ignore as if you're already the owner and you're kind of just sitting on this. But if you're a new buyer, you're going to end up with some overhead cloud asset, so you're thinking about making a major investment. So this is a big consideration, and you wouldn't pick it up unless you were, either driving around out there or you're on Google Earth. So I kind of spec'd out, how many parking spaces could you set up out here? What would it cost? You're probably looking at $300,000 or $400,000 to grade this and put some sort of recycled asphalt or something on it and go ahead and put some parking places out here. And I suspect you can lease it fairly quick. This area is becoming pretty busy, and the only issue I see with a site like this and with the type of play that we would normally pursue is there's not a lot of master plan communities around here. And so, kind of backing away and thinking about demand. Yeah. They are out further to the east. So you kind of cut and shoot? Yeah, out in cut and shoot. That's right. And this is an older image, I think, we're looking at here. But, I think one thing we would really look to is this is my biggest concern with deals like this. Your competition is people storing stuff in their yard. And look at what you've got back here.
Yeah, right. You got plenty of yards.
You got plenty of yards. You got plenty of people storing stuff in yards.
And they're not interested in your. They're not paying Big City Andrew to store their stuff for them.
Especially now that I live in this city, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to say that there are 0 deed restrictions about parking whatever you want in the yard out here. I don't know much, but I think that's a fair.
Yeah. And anywhere out here, if it doesn't look like it's master plan on Google Earth, like you come in here, these are probably deed restricted. They're probably HOA. If you come out here, you can tell when there's rural estates, right? Even out here, you're probably somewhat restricted, but something like this is a free for all, right? So you really are trying to look at, especially with a play like this, how many tightly controlled neighborhoods are around you? How many rooftops are around you? And what is the number of parking spaces per home? Right? Like what percentage of the homes need parking, have RVs, have boats, have trailers, and where would they be parking those otherwise? So it's kind of like what's somebody's best alternative to what you're providing. And where we like to be, I think, with sites like this is the closer proximity to the master plan communities, the better. The more growth in that specific community, the better. And the more of those communities around you, the better. So usually when we're looking at sites, especially for development, we're looking at all the tracts around us, all the parcels, and we want to know who controls all of them. And is it a home builder? When did they buy it? what are their plans? What are their announced plans? And do they have any dirt work? Or are they doing any environmental work on the site right now? And so we're trying to project out into time what that neighborhood and area is going to look like in 10 years, right? And, you can get lucky with this, or, you can be good at it. And I think on the first site, we probably got a little bit of luck going on. It was a growing area, certainly in Katy, but when you add 7,000 new homes across the street from you, that's pretty unusual.
Yeah. Is there any kind of data you can get that shows you who owns a boat and an RV on a map?
Yeah, so we actually did this, went through this exercise. There is registration data for boats and RVs that we pulled, and we used it, Eric, not to map where they were, but actually to figure out. Well, we kind of mapped where they were, but we also were doing outreach, right? So we were sending mailers and we were trying to get some direct marketing going. I don't know that any of that was very successful, frankly. I think, when people need storage, they just go on Google and they look for it. So the marketing approach, we had a very ambitious plan at the beginning, and we spent a bunch of money on it too. We were really trying a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, the things that seem to work best with this are be visible online. And you can put some signs out too. People see and call signs for sure, but they're temporary. You put them up, someone takes them down, somebody calls you, tells you come get your shit off the side of the road. That's pretty common. So,
but you want a visible site on a busy road in an ideal world.
Yeah, in an ideal world, that's better, especially for traditional storage, Eric. But I would also say that one thing that we've leveraged a little bit is with boat and RV, people will drive a lot further for it. They'll drive 15 minutes, 15 miles, they'll go a long way, because one of the weird features of boat and RV storage, and this property isn't specifically boat and RV, but if you had a property that was specifically boat and RV storage, it is, you can't build these in the city because the land price that you need to pay is too low, right? So you're really playing on the fringe of the exurbs where you can afford the dirt and make the numbers work, but not that it needs to be just close enough to people to be able to drive to, right? But not so far out that you're further away from anybody's home than all the other facilities.
Right. There's like a donut around every city, and there's a pretty thin band. Yeah.
It's probably 2 or 3 miles, right? Yeah. If you're talking about a city as large as Houston, you're probably talking a 2-mile band all the way around I-99 or State Highway 99 that runs around the whole city. And it's probably even further out than that at this point. That's where we're at. So, that band is where land can be acquired at the right price, and yet people will still drive to you. And if you look inside the city, there is no boat and RV storage available, right? It's always 100% leased up. So it's like an endemic shortage of this product. But it can be overbuilt on the fringes, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where you're in a sub-market where it gets overbuilt and growth somehow stops, or maybe there's the home development stops. You want to be in a situation where you build in front of the path of growth, then you let the neighborhoods be built around you. Now nobody can spend $1 a square foot on dirt anymore. They have to spend $3 or $4 or $5, right? Or more.
Yeah, it seems like the thing with these is what would make it super sweet is if you could find locations that were in the path of growth, but were of a shape and size that could say be a shopping center in the future, have where this becomes sort of a land bank for something really fun to happen in 20 years.
Right. Yeah, our second site is much closer to that, Eric, where it's on a better thoroughfare. We're thinking of it as industrial, right? But one thing that we've started really liking about these sites is if you do open parking, you've not done enough improvement to the site to where it can truly be a covered land site, right? And we've found a ton of velocity leasing open parking, willingness to pay, especially if you're near these master plan communities, as long as you've got a clean, safe facility. And so I love that as a play. The downside is the type of tenants you're going to be dealing with. They're often commercial. They're coming in and out all the time. They might have wear and tear on your facility, but you're exactly right that if you want to reserve that site for something that could be a higher and better use someday, open parking plays are a great way to do it. Even if you had a site where you could subdivide it and put the storage on a part of it and leave the rest of it open, right? The other thing I like about it is it is very, very tax efficient. You can write off almost all this stuff the moment you make the investment, or you used to be able to. This is what we did on the first facility. So it's highly depreciable stuff. It's short life stuff. It's site improvements. It's fencing. It's lighting. And so we sort of took advantage of that early on. As we keep going, we're adding more and more substantial buildings to the first site. The second site might be all light industrial, and so it may or may not benefit from some of that. But yeah, we're thinking about that. You need to be on a little bit more trafficked road and be thinking further out, probably from the city. Because if you're looking for open parking, you're probably not really going to be able to make it work great unless you're sub 250 a square foot, for the dirt. Mm-hmm. It's got to be somewhere in that range. And for retail guys, they think of that and they say, well, that's really, really cheap. So that kind of leads you toward buying these 15 to 20 acre tracts, 30 acre tracts, and doing this on a part of it.
I've got a pal who built those cinder block little buildings that have the car wash, like you wash it kind of car wash things, and he built them for he probably built 25 of them. Had an old man go around and collect the quarters, and then he'd frisk them at night to make sure he got all his money. And but those are now Chipotle's and Chick-fil-A's, and I think he's probably, then he's got ground leases on all of those, which has been a fantastic business. The only rub is you need to have picked really good sites, and you need to have done it 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's
well, and it's good news for you, Andrew. Quickly here is the of the 17 listeners. Going back to your advantageous tax treatment, I don't think anyone from the IRS is watching this.
No.
So you got that going for you, which is nice. And then I had come up with very few good ideas, which I think Eric and Elliot can attest to. But going back to the floodplain area, and I guess this might be like a niche play within somewhat of a kind of specialized asset class. But what if you just catered to like people that owned airboats or flats boats that could run in like 8 inches of water? So they would be thrilled.
Yeah, they'd be fine.
If, kind of there's winners and losers in every kind of situation, and they would be like in hog heaven. I guess that's a good Texas.
Yeah, that's right. You can launch right into the floodplain, right down in the creek. You could put a boat ramp back there and just have a ball.
Pitching floods is a feature. I'm waiting for that to show up in the LM.
That'll be
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So Andrew, for you to get excited about moving forward on something like this, what is and you can also just tell me we're not going to have this conversation. But what's kind of a return profile where you think, okay, given the risk that I believe to be out there, I would accept these kinds of returns on this type of an investment?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we took a lot of risk on the development of our first site. This is a more stabilized asset, right? It's already partially built. I think I would be looking for a site like this for us. I don't have an advantage in financing it, right? So if I went to some lender and I said, hey, please give me a loan, they'd say, okay, it's a community bank and I'll give you an 8.5%, recourse loan to go buy something like this, right? It's $2.5 million. Well, that's not great because I probably would not be able to get more than an 8% yield out of something like this, even developing the parking in the back. So it's just there's no spread there for us. I would say though that, if you could get this thing at a couple $1 million or $1.9 million, and you had a pretty good idea around how you were going to build some parking in the back, and you felt like there was a strong market for somebody that was financing it with investor capital and was doing it with equity, then yeah, I think it would be an interesting play. I don't think I would touch it with the environmental stuff next door. I've had too many. I've gotten burned too bad with that. And so for me, that would be a hard stop on this. I probably wouldn't even spend the money on the phase one. I would just stop.
Right, because on a long enough timeline, that problem becomes your problem.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that some people think that it's just, oh, I either, I have a bad phase one or that's on an adjacent property. But what they don't understand is that will prevent any subsequent buyer from wanting to deal with your property.
Yeah.
Even if it's clean. So this is the ongoing issue that you run into with these environmental studies is the owners have a tendency not to want to know. They want to put their head in the sand. Even if it's adjacent property, they're just not interested. If they get a survey, if they do a phase two, they have to disclose it to you by law, like it's required. So, and if they fail to do that, that's whatever, fraudulent misrepresentation. So they don't want to know about a problem if one exists. You don't want to be the one that catches the hot potato and it burns your hand.
Yep.
So I would look for a clean property, one that's away from all this BS. Auto salvage in particular is quite dirty. There are some other type of uses where I look at it and say, this is probably not a big deal. If there's some oil in the ground or there's this or there's that. But if I think they've been using degreasers or perk or any other kind of something that's highly mobile, it's going to get in the water table and it's going to screw everything up around it. I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, that's smart.
It's this.
It definitely precludes any sort of residential.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. But I guess going back to the debt story, you might want to call Elliot because he's got lending sources that'll give him more favorable financing because it's mission driven business. Okay. And so maybe you guys could talk offline about the mission driven.
Yeah, providing
component.
Providing lockers of love, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, you're fitting into this podcast real well here.
I traced the origin of cut and shoot. If you guys are curious about how this place got its name, there was back in 1912, there was a big brawl in the center of the community about a new church being put up and whether it should be built or not. So it was development related, as it always is. And I guess people were threatening to shoot each other. And some boy said, I'm going to cut around the corner and shoot through the bushes in a minute. And apparently that term has stuck with the town. So that's the origin of cut.
That's very on brand.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd also say that's probably a reason the next town to the east on 105 is called Security, Texas. So this is all just kind of making a ton of sense now.
Elliot. Yeah, it's really building a theme, a broader theme.
Right. This is the Wild West up here in Conrad.
Yeah. And to be fair, it was a very rural area and is, like I said, one of the faster growing exurbs. I like this. If we were looking in one other market, we'd probably look in this one relative to the other two that we've picked off, around Houston. But this one's got some stranger features. It's like even more entrenched rural versus some of the other ones that we're looking at are like full agricultural that are just being completely redeveloped. So I kind of like those clean slate plays a little bit better because it's open territory. There's nothing stopping development. Maybe there's no floodplain. It's just a big wide open area. And those big tracts will eventually fall to the home builders. So there's not really any end to the Houston sprawl. It just keeps going.
That's Texas at its finest, right? I mean, I joke Dallas. The Dallas MSA goes to the Oklahoma state line at this point.
I mean, take advantage of it. I tell people, what we're doing is not like the smartest form of development, but it also, as long as you're in the right area and you feel pretty strongly that area is going to keep growing, you need to just figure out a way to hold on to these properties for a long time, right? You don't want to – I don't think that our asset class really lends it. I mean, you can do this, certainly build as a merchant builder and sell it, right? But, and I've seen people do that and do well, but a lot of the guys that are in our class or girls that are in our class are very – they build it out of some other cash flow and they just kind of sit around and maybe they expand it over time and they just continue to own it. So there are some folks, I know there's some folks that are doing institutional boat and RV storage, which is the weirdest oxymoron on earth, but they have funds that are raised just for boat and RV storage.
Yeah, CBRE has a whole brokerage team dedicated to that now too that I've seen, just like shilling marinas around the country.
Yeah, well, marinas are interesting, and I think a pretty separate, I'd say pretty separate asset class. The on-land stuff is, ours is a variant of, I wouldn't call it iOS or the industrial outdoor storage, but some people would, I guess. And there are certainly commercial users of our product.
Well, Andrew, there's an outdoor, very similar type product that you're talking about here, and this is free marketing advice because I don't think the name of this facility has been trademarked, but it's called Bob's Adult Toy Storage. And so,
That
like,
sounds
where
right.
your mind goes with that is kind of obviously in another direction. But in terms of like a Google search, you're definitely going to get some clicks if you use something like that.
Toy storage is a popular phrase, believe it or not. I've actually seen that used elsewhere. I've seen the word sheds used with a Z. I've seen
Street
yeah,
cred.
toy storage is it's a big thing. And I mean, like your prototypical person that owns these things it's like a 55-year-old business owner that worked in the trades and has a backhoe, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's very very much middle of the road for what we see as far as our competitors. And I don't like to discount them because they definitely have an advantage over us. They can build for cheaper. So we just have to be really sensitive to what we're building and make sure that it's not the easiest possible thing to construct, because if it is, you can bet that there's some coming next to you.
That's the trick, is competing with people that bought land in the 70s or inherited land and do GC work themselves and can build these tin buildings or create a gravel lot. When things become about price, that's a really hard person to compete with. So there's probably where you found a niche is finding the sneaky site that's maybe not obvious, that has some of these attributes but can be re-engineered or purchased at a price that allows you to be competitive with these other people.
Yeah, it would be between the cost of land for bulk home building and rural homesteads. And we've found some success in areas that are totally unzoned, right? So they're in the county, they have no restrictions on what you can build, and the sellers of that land are thinking it's for a rural homestead, right? And it's 10 or 15 or 20 acres or whatever it is. Those are right in our strike zone, right? And we've had some good luck finding folks who were just selling excess land, or they had land next to them and they say, hey, you know what, I don't need this, and I want to get, $500,000 for my dirt. And so if you can find that situation, they're not thinking about it as a commercial development yet because it's too early. But boat and RV storage fits perfectly into that. And you're exactly right. If there's a bunch of legacy landowners, guys that have trades and they got bulldozers and they got all this earthwork equipment and they can go do their own work, you have to watch out for that. You have to see what's around you. I like to be, surrounded by either giant tracts that are going to be home builder tracts, or commercial or large residential homesteads, right, that are unzoned. So, that's what we did in Katy. We basically built this thing in the middle of these big legacy rural homestead estates, and just nobody saw it coming because there were no restrictions. So, you can do that, but then now that there's homes across the street and there's a bunch more activity, people are paying attention to it, and so they're thinking of it. And what would have been $1 a square foot is now $3 or $4, and it's much harder to make the numbers work if you do that unless you're an existing landowner.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of environmental problems. There's a lot of when you can get in there and understand a thing. Because it scares off so many people, you usually don't have any competition or limited competition in buying stuff if you can understand it. But in these rural areas, it's going to cost you to clean it up. Even if it's a tiny amount, you're at a disadvantage. So these environmental problems, even if they're not a huge problem on the face of it, there's a cost associated with it that takes you, when you're in the business of buying and acquiring cheap land, by definition, you can't do that.
Yeah, I think it depends on your business model a little bit too, Eric. Like, if my business model is buying something, value add, improving it, and then selling it, well, I need to prepare myself for the fact that someone else is going to see this phase 1 or 2 issue that I'm going to uncover. And they're not going to be able to deal with it. I'm going to lose 90% of my buyer universe, right? Whereas if I'm a long-term holder and I go and buy a property and I say, you know what, this is something I can mitigate or I can manage. I mean, for me, that's going to be with fluids underground that are not mobile, right? Like I want something that if it's heavy crude oil or volatile organic components or whatever, I want something that's stationary and can be cleaned up. I don't want perk that's going to be going every direction and down to the water table. And then I'm going to have to go look and see how deep is the aquifer and drinking water. Is it 15 feet underground and it's all sandstone and the shit's just going to go straight down and, go every direction. And now you can't clean that up. I mean, now if you're not doing residential, then you don't maybe have the same constraints. But if you buy something like this with a real problem next to it, a potential problem, you better be prepared to own it for a long time. Oh. And I crossed this bridge in 2023 and, I couldn't make the brain damage worth whatever money I might have made out of the deal. And, I'd be real picky to do that again because there's some contaminants you can kind of deal with, right? Or there's certain stuff that'll show up on a phase one where you're like, all right, that's, barite, mud that somebody had out here in a pit. Like it's not going anywhere. But if you got something that's highly mobile and it can poison people or it can get in the groundwater, that's a real big issue.
Watch out for Aaron Brockovich coming to town.
That's right.
Yeah. Gents, probably a good place for us to wrap up. I don't know if y'all have any questions or any notes you want to end on.
I think Brent's going to leave his bell in the drawer today, I think.
Yeah, Brett's not a buyer here.
I think so. No, I'm not a buyer. But yes, the bell is here.
The bell is here, but none of us are buying this. I agree with Andrew.
I think Andrew, we would defer to Andrew here. One final question. I think this question comes up in the multifamily space a lot. What percentage of residents, kind of type question, what percentage of residents have pets? Like nobody really knows. But what percentage would you say folks of storing RVs bought these during COVID and have no interest in owning them anymore?
Yeah, I mean it's a non-zero percentage.
Yeah,
right?
I believe it.
There was a pretty good slug of people that, especially in COVID, that were buying new stuff. We would get calls, Brett, where people couldn't back the RV in. They didn't even know how to back things up.
That would have been me.
They call us and they say, "Can you help us back this RV in this space?" And I say, "I don't know, guys. I didn't sign up for that."
Yeah.